This first gospel reading is from the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus is the one that's speaking. The lesson is to make a response to a misdeed, which is more the opposite of what is expected. Perhaps Jeff will be saying more about that. Yes. Now hear the verse from Matthew. You have heard that it is said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. For if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, give them your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. We have another lesson from Matthew today, preceding the second lesson, where the events of the Last Supper. After the meal, Jesus and 11 disciples leave Jerusalem and go to the Mount of Olives. It must have been a heavy meal because the 11 disciples were sleeping. Hear what happens next. While Jesus was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him, a large crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given him a sign, saying, the one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him. At once he came up to Jesus and said, Greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. Jesus said to him, Friend, do what you are here to do. Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. Suddenly, one of those with Jesus put his hand on his sword, drew it, and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will die by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled, which say that it must happen this way? At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a rebel? Day after day, I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me. But all this has taken place so that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled. Then all the disciples deserted him and fled.
I know it's only the third week of Lent, and so it's a little strange to be reading a lesson about the arrest of Jesus. That's a Good Friday lesson, and it may seem as if I've jumped the gun. But the story of the arrest of Jesus is an important text to me, especially when it comes to questions about violence and nonviolence. And with the U.S. and Israel launching their war in Iran, I felt it was important to speak on this topic this week. All four Gospels say that when Jesus was arrested, one of the people who was with him drew a sword and cut off the ear of a person who had been enslaved by the high priest. Apparently, this enslaved person was part of the party of people that came from the high priest's office to arrest Jesus. The word that's translated sword in the New Revised Standard Version can also be translated dagger. So it's unclear if we're talking about a military weapon or if we're talking about a tool that someone might have carried for the craft that they worked on, or if it might have been a defensive weapon for when you're out in the countryside and need to fend off wild animals. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke's telling, it is not clear who this person is who draws the sword. It's simply one of the people who are with Jesus. And so it might not even be one of those 11 disciples who came with him out into the garden to pray that night. John tells the story slightly differently. John says that it was Peter, Jesus' closest disciple, who drew the sword and cut off the ear of the enslaved person. In all four versions, Jesus' response is essentially the same. He responds by both healing the injury of the enslaved person and by telling the person wielding the sword to put it away. Matthew concludes with this line, "For all who take the sword will die by the sword." This story is one that I started wrestling with in 1980 when President Jimmy Carter reinstituted draft registration. I had long opposed war. In fact, one of my earliest memories is of marching against the war in Vietnam in 1968 or 69. I was 7 or 8 years old. It seems to me that this story of Jesus being arrested by the principalities and powers of his day so that they could execute him, and the response of one of his followers, as well as Jesus' own response to the crowd coming to arrest him and the defensive act by one of his followers, are important. I understand that impulsive desire to protect Jesus when he's about to be arrested, to put up a fight, and I think Jesus' response to that is vital. Jesus said, "Don't." Jesus tells his disciples to put away the sword. And it seems even now to me that Jesus was and is telling his disciples to disarm. I'm not the first to say this. Tertullian, you all remember who Tertullian is, right? Of course. He's right around the year 2000. He lived, one of the church fathers, first to really write extensively in Latin about Christianity. Sometime around the year 200, the church father Tertullian said, "Christ, in disarming Peter, disarms all Christians." And in fact, in the early church, there was a general consensus that one couldn't be a Christian and a soldier. This started changing in the 300s. In 313, Christianity became legalized in the Roman Empire. In 381, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And then Christianity started flirting with and eventually married political power and lost its way. And an example of its losing its way is the justifications for war that subsequently evolved. St. Augustine, the dapper-looking fellow on the right in the slide there, St. Augustine wasn't even 30 when Christianity became the official religion of Rome. I bring him up because he, more than any other Christian leader, was the one who first started formalizing in Christianity what has been known as the just war theory. Supposedly, the just war theory puts limits on when a country can go to war, and once at war, how that war can be conducted. Some just war theorists now add a third element to it, how one should justly leave a war. I think that the theory actually evolved to give the empire political cover for its warring madness. The just war theory says that to go to war, the war must be declared by a competent authority. That is, it must be initiated by, now. It must be initiated by a political authority within a political system that allows for distinctions of justice. There must be a probability of success. You don't go to war if it's going to lead to a stalemate or to your own defeat. War must be a last resort. All other options must have been tried and failed. War must be in pursuit of a just cause. That is, innocent life must be in imminent danger, and intervention must be to protect that life. Once a war has been declared, once at war, it has to be conducted justly. Distinction must be made between military targets, for instance, military bases, and non-military targets, for instance, girls' schools or hospitals. The amount of force used must be restrained so that what we now call collateral damage is limited. Likewise, the force used must not outweigh the military objective, and these two things are called proportionality. Military action must be a military necessity. That is, all military action must be intended to help in the defeat of the enemy. Prisoners must be treated fairly, and weapons of war must not be evil in themselves. So this restricts everything from using rape as a weapon to using nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. A cursory look at these criteria and our war in Iran makes it clear that this war is not just. In fact, none of the wars the United States has been involved with during my lifetime meet the criteria. I don't think the United States has fought a just war since at least the beginning of the 20th century. This has led me to reach the conclusion that a so-called just war is just a war. There is no such thing as a war that can be fought justly. World War II is often lifted up as a counter-argument to my contention that every war that the United States have fought since at least the beginning of the 20th century, because it may have met the criteria of reasons to go to war. That's clear to me is that our execution of that war, and I'm thinking about things like the firebombing of Dresden and the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as other incidents, fail to meet several of the criteria of how a war is conducted. I know that with our binary thinking, we tend to assume that we can either be active or passive. We can either be the victor or the victim. But I believe Jesus teaches a third way of nonviolence. It is a way to be active without being a victimizer. And an aspect of this third way is revealed in our other scripture reading. In this section of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus sets up a little patter that he starts doing. You have heard it said, but I say. And he goes through various commandments in the Torah. You've heard it said, this teaching from the Torah, but I say this teaching. In today's reading, Jesus quotes a passage that is known as the Lex Talionis. It appears in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. There is much that could be said about the Lex Talionis. It is important enough that it has its own Latin name. But for today, let me just say that it was implemented to interrupt escalating cycles of violence. You hit me, so I stab you, so you kill me, so my family kills you and another member of your family, and the next thing you know, we've got the Hatfields and the McCoys. The purpose of the Lex Talionis is to break that cycle of violence and to protect slaves and members of lower classes from capricious treatment of their superiors. Well, Jesus takes this idea of breaking the cycle of violence, and he expands on it. He goes deeper with it. Instead of meeting violence with violence, violence should be met with active, nonviolent resistance. Now, at first, Jesus' lines about turning the other cheek, about giving your second garment, about walking the extra mile sound like being totally passive and being walked all over. If we hear this advice in the context of a class-stratified, honor-shame society, it has a very different meaning. Some of you are old enough, like me, to remember the movie In the Heat of the Night, 1967, Sidney Poitier, Rod Steiger. Poitier plays Virgil Tibbs, a black police detective from Philadelphia who ends up being involved in a murder investigation in a small town in Mississippi. At one point in the investigation, Tibbs and Police Chief Gillespie go to question plantation owner Eric Endicott, a white man with significant political and economic power in the town. During the questioning, Endicott slaps Tibbs. A civilian slaps a police officer. Think about how that would be responded to today. Now, Endicott is white and powerful, and Tibbs is black and an outsider. 1967. I'm going to play a clip of the slap. If you're willing to watch it, and I realize you might not want to, but if you're willing to watch it, there are three things I'd like you to notice. How Endicott slaps Tibbs, how Tibbs responds, and then Endicott's response to Tibbs' response.
Was Mr. Colbert ever in this greenhouse, say last night about midnight?
Gillespie,
Yeah,
you saw it.
I saw it.
Well, what are you going to do about it?
I don't know.
Did you notice that when Endicott slapped Tibbs, he backhanded him? That was not only violent physically, it was violent emotionally. That type of a slap is a put down. Even today, that type of a slap says, you are not of my caliber, of my class, of my station. And that was certainly the case in the time of Jesus. A backhanded slap, which would always be done with the right hand because your left hand was your toilet hand. So you didn't do anything besides toileting with your left hand. Slap with your right hand, that means I'm going to hit your right cheek. Now, Tibbs slaps him back, and he does the same thing. Backhands Endicott. Rather than slapping back, Jesus says his disciples are to offer their other cheek. Well, if you offer your left cheek after your right cheek has been slapped, the only way to be hit back is with a punch, which demands that you be seen as an equal. Shame them into recognizing your worth and your equality, Jesus is saying. If a person sues you for your inner garment, give them your outer garment as well. Translated shirt and tunic and cloak. But people in Jesus' time had two pieces of clothing, their inner garment and their outer garment. And so if somebody sues you for your inner garment, give them your outer garment as well, so that you will be naked. In an honor-shame society like Jesus, where he lived, it is the person who forces you to end up naked who is shamed by your nakedness. So if you get sued for one garment, give them your other garment too, and shame them into recognizing their injustice. There was one particular type of person who could force you to walk for 1 mile, carrying their stuff. A Roman soldier. But a Roman soldier was only allowed to force you to walk 1 mile. Keep them from abusing the locals, you know. So go a second mile and get the soldier in trouble. When we take these two passages together, one in which Jesus disarms his followers and one in which Jesus explains how to claim your power without being violent, without becoming the violence you are opposing, we see an invitation to a life based on nonviolence. And more than that, we see Jesus' good news revealed. In Luke's gospel, the very first act of public ministry Jesus takes is to teach in the synagogue where he was raised. And he opens the scroll to the prophet Isaiah, and he finds the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." That's Jesus' good news, the news that's revealed through nonviolence. To be honest, I've actually had some resistance to this theme. Yeah, I know, I picked it. Tell me something good. And I realized my resistance was that what I want is to be told something that makes me feel good, not that is good. When Jesus has to say what Jesus has to say, the good news Jesus has to share is news not designed to make me feel good. It's news designed to challenge me. The good news is that we are invited, and that means we need to welcome even our enemies. The good news is surprising, not comforting. It's like a weed that messes up the garden, not like a glass of iced tea on a hot day. The good news is great love for God and neighbor. Darn it, my neighbors include people who I keep wanting to call them. Remember, Jesus' good news made the powers that be feel worse. Jesus' good news was about release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, and it so wigged out the principalities and powers of his day that they killed him. Jesus' good news is that God's love is a call to create justice, because justice is what love looks like in public. This good news is revealed through nonviolence when we embody it not only as a strategy, but as a way of life. Amen.